Hello, bonjour, hola, guten tag, neho, and namaste. I'm Winnie Everts, the event coordinator with the Petroleum Institute for Continuing Education, commonly known as PEACE, and I'm looking after today's technical support and aspects of today's webinar. First, we'll start our webinar in a few moments. Please type in the chat pod on the bottom right-hand corner if you have any audio issues. Please ensure your browsers are closed and speakers are turned up. Today's agenda is our welcome and introductions. We have a PowerPoint presentation. We'll have some open floor Q&A at the end of the presentation, and we'll have a closing remarks. I'd like to start with a few introductory words about RPS and PEACE, who are running today's webinar. RPS is a global consultancy offering a wide range of consulting, advisory, and operational support services to the oil and gas industry. PEACE is one of the two training companies owned by RPS. The other is Nautilus World, and between us, we offer a wide portfolio of classroom courses, online webinars to the upstream, midstream, and downstream sectors of the petroleum industry. Thank you for joining us today, and request if you have any questions, please note them in the chat pod, and they'll be reviewed for you. If the webinar runs longer than the allotted half an hour, we understand if you'll need to leave. The webinar has been recorded, and a recording link will be sent to you for further viewing later today. Our instructor today is Mr. Kyle Shelton. Kyle has over 30 years of experience in the environmental field. His primary areas of experience include hazardous and solid waste permitting and compliance, wastewater permitting and compliance, corrective action, multimedia auditing, litigation support, and spill prevention and response. Kyle supports a wide variety of projects and clients involving application of federal and regulations, associated policy, and guidance. We'll now start our webinar. Kyle, please take it from here.
Great. Thank you, Winnie. Again, my name is Kyle Shelton, and I'm broadcasting live from RPS offices in Austin, Texas, where it's a sunny 75 degrees Fahrenheit, about 22 Celsius, beautiful day. And today we've got a bit of an obscure topic, but one that you'll see later in the presentation has significant cost savings applications, especially stateside for hazardous waste management programs. Let me fast forward a little bit. And just some of the consulting advisory services which Winnie alluded to. RPS provides international consultancy for production well engineering, reserve evaluations, reporting, field studies, acquisitions, divestitures, geosciences, and training. We also provide operation support services for a variety of primarily upstream oil and gas clientele that include seismic operations, HSE, processing, well ops, site investigation, geotechnics, geohazards, land services, and environmental consulting, which is the group that I am in. So today the RCRA Delisting program, and RCRA stands for Resource Conservation and Recovery Act. I'll try and make it a point to first define every acronym that I use if it's not already defined on the screen. And this is a program which EPA originally implemented when rules were promulgated back in 1980. So it's been around a long time, and the very high-level overview is this is a program that allows materials that would otherwise be classified as hazardous waste, listed hazardous waste, and takes them out of that classification such that they are no longer subject to hazardous waste standards. As I mentioned, this has a tremendous upside on the bottom line and how these materials are managed. And it's really a tale of two programs. Early on, the program was administered out of Washington. It was viewed as very cumbersome, very difficult to navigate through, and you had to be extremely persistent, bring a lot of lawyers and lobbyists to the table to get one of these delisting petitions approved. The program has changed significantly, and that really began in 1996 when, as we'll learn later, the EPA basically rolled this out to the individual regions. So what is delisting? Well, it is a formal rulemaking procedure. So it goes through the Federal Register, has notice of the petition, an opportunity for comment, and then goes through a final promulgation phase. And as I mentioned, it basically relieves the facility of its obligations to manage specific waste as hazardous. That has a lot of implications in terms of cost. It is an action that is waste specific and facility specific. So let's really refresh a little bit on hazardous waste under RCRA and what that means for those that may not be that familiar with EPA's hazardous waste regulations. There are really two types of hazardous waste: characteristic and listed. A delisting petition focuses on the listing category. The characteristics that a hazardous waste could exhibit are ignitability, basically a low flash point; corrosivity, it's very acidic or caustic; reactivity, it's not very stable; or toxicity, and this is when it has a certain threshold concentration of constituents that EPA has made focus of as being particularly prevalent and toxic. Characteristic wastes remain hazardous until they are decharacterized or they no longer exhibit that characteristic. So characteristic wastes are not eligible for delisting because they exhibit a characteristic. EPA still considers them hazardous. So a delisting petition cannot be successfully submitted for a characteristic hazardous waste. But if it's a listed waste, then it's a candidate for delisting. So listed wastes are identified in the regulations. There are four types: the F-listed, which are non-specific. They can be generated anywhere. There are the K-listed wastes. Those are very specific and typically associated with things like petroleum refineries, chemical plants, steel mills, things like that. The lists include also waste commercial chemical products, and those are the P and U listed wastes. Hazardous wastes that are listed remain hazardous wastes unless they are delisted. So delisting has three basic forms. There is a one-time petition that can be submitted, a conditional petition, or an upfront petition. Most of my experience, 20 plus years in delisting petitions, has been with either the one-time or the conditional. One-time is basically for a specific batch of hazardous waste at a particular facility, a snapshot in time, such as a surface impoundment that has sludge that's considered hazardous waste in the bottom. You want to clean it out. That's a one-time delisting petition. It covers the one-time clean out of that surface impoundment. A conditional approval is more for ongoing hazardous wastes that are routinely generated, such as bottom ash or fly ash from an incinerator managing hazardous waste. And then an upfront delisting is when you have, say, facility A generating a hazardous waste that's been delisted, and you try and apply that to facility B that's being constructed. So this one requires basically an exact demonstration that facilities A and B are the same, therefore their hazardous waste would be the same. Delisting criteria. So what's the objective EPA uses to determine if they want to delist or agree with your belief that a waste should be delisted? Well, as I said earlier, it can't be characteristic. So it can't demonstrate any of the hazardous characteristics if it's going to be delisted. And the second big criterion is the waste does not present a hazard to human health or the environment. Well, that seems kind of ambiguous, but there's a specific methodology for quantifying that, which is an EPA model that's used to evaluate data from a particular hazardous waste. And we'll get into that. So the procedures, as I mentioned, were originally codified with RCRA, published in the Code of Federal Regulations back in 1980. A petition has to include basic information about the facility generating the hazardous waste, the processes and chemicals used at that facility, waste management practices, as well as a very comprehensive data set regarding hazardous constituents within the particular waste stream. So some of the decision-making objectives that EPA runs through to determine if they think a particular waste stream is protective of human health and the environment Well, they first use a risk-based approach. And the second major tool is using fate and transport modeling. It's called DRAS model, or Delisting Risk Assessment Software, which is what DRAS stands for. The model basically simulates how a particular waste stream would react in the environment, potentially reach receptors if it's disposed of in either a landfill or a surface impoundment, so some form of long-term land disposal. Modifications you can make, you can tweak with the model and try and demonstrate different relative risk-based tolerances. The risk range can be modified from 10 to the minus 4 to 10 to the minus 6, and the hazard quotient for carcinogens can be modified from 0.1 to 10. Typically, when I make these runs, I start with a 10 to the minus 5 range for the risk and a 1 for the hazard quotient. Some typical waste streams that have been successful in delisting petitions: metal-bearing waste. Region 5 up in the Chicago area has had a lot of requests for metal-bearing waste, wastewater treatment sludge from plating type operations associated with manufacturing that typically supports the auto industry out of Detroit. So dozens of metal-bearing waste streams have been successfully delisted. Refinery wastes are also a good candidate if they have lower oil content. Historically, when the refinery waste codes were initially put in place by EPA, recovery of slop oil was not near as prevalent as it is today. So a lot of those waste codes are based on higher oil content, higher constituents of concern. With enhanced oil recovery through slop systems, we see that the recre-hazardous constituents are less prevalent than they were in the past. So a lot of refinery wastes are good candidates. Treated electric arc furnace dust is another successful petition that's been approved by EPA numerous times. And this is also a very simple one. It only has a couple of inorganic metallic constituents. In general, remediation waste, if they have mixture derived from implications, that's where a listed waste gets mixed with another material or waste when being excavated. Materials that already pass the land disposal restrictions as they're generated are also good candidates. And as you can imagine, if you run a hazardous waste through a combustion unit like a rotary kiln incinerator, you pretty much take out most of the hazardous constituents through treatment, so that's a good candidate as well. So the record delisting program, just running through some of the administrative or procedural steps, it's very much encouraged now with the regions implementing these programs to have an initial scoping meeting with your particular region. And in that scoping meeting, you want to give as much background on the waste stream, how it's generated, the context, present any preliminary data or any evaluation that you've already performed, and basically get EPA comfortable with the approach that you're taking for delisting to make sure that it meets the guidance manuals, EPA's internal procedures for processing it, and basically just get them on board. If they're in general accord, then the next step in the process is to prepare a formal sampling and analysis plan and basically do a very thorough job of framing the particular waste stream, how you plan to address a thorough sampling approach to generate data. Then you would, if the data are favorable, roll that into a formal delisting petition request that gets submitted to EPA, and if they concur, then it goes through the rulemaking process. So at that initial scoping meeting, again, we're just discussing the waste, the process generating the waste. You want to make sure that you actually discuss this with the EPA staff member that's going to be reviewing your sampling analysis plan and ultimately your delisting petition. And as with most scoping meetings, independent of the media or the program, it really reduces the number of NODs or notices of deficiency, the back and forth bantering over technical issues. Sampling and analysis plan. Most EPA regions encourage that they be submitted, reviewed, and approved prior to implementing your testing program. That way you don't spend a lot of money and then generate data sets that EPA considers are inherently flawed. If you get the approval, then basically, it usually takes about 2 months for EPA to review and generate comments and or approve a sampling and analysis plan. But once you get approval, then you're free to move forward on implementing the plan, and you have a reasonable level of assurance that the data will be supportive and generated according to EPA criteria. So again, if that data set comes back, what I tend to do first is the bullet point in the middle, which is actually run EPA's model and determine if the data are supportive or appear to be supportive from my perspective of a delisting petition. If they are, then basically I will do a formal QA/QC check on everything and move forward with preparation of the delisting petition. Once EPA reviews the delisting petition, they will issue a proposed rule. If they move forward, it will have a public comment period that's generally 30 days. Some regions prefer to have a longer comment period. And if no adverse comments are received, then EPA will typically move forward with promulgation of the final rule. Some other considerations if you're going through the delisting program or having someone like me lead you through the delisting program is cost and timing. My experience has been these are pretty big, extensive projects and usually cost between $75,000 and $150,000. Turnkey costs for a consultant like me to prepare all the materials, implement the sampling, evaluate, model the data, and then prepare a delisting petition. And then the second bullet is the money shot, so to speak, that if a delisting petition is successfully approved by EPA, you have a cost savings in managing the material that ranges between $300 to $500 per ton or per cubic yard. Subtitle C, that's the hazardous waste management landfill and maybe incineration beforehand, is typically around $400 to $500 per ton in disposal fees. A subtitle D, which is an industrial or municipal non-hazardous landfill, is typically closer to $50 a ton in terms of disposal fees. So that's really the benefit from the delisting process right there, front and center. If you're planning to execute one of these projects, pretty much the quickest you can get through from start to finish is about 12 months. 18 months is a better planning range, but all of these are highly dependent on EPA staff availability and their timing through the process. EPA does delegate, in certain instances, their rules to authorized states. Delisting petitions are no different. There are currently about half the states in the U.S. which are delegated and have authorization for doing their own delisting petition projects. In Region 6, which is the EPA region that I typically work in, Louisiana and Oklahoma have both been given authorization. And it's important to note that if a state is authorized for delisting, it can only issue delistings effective for in that state. So if you get one approved in Louisiana, the waste cannot be managed in Texas. It has to be managed in Louisiana. It's only good inside the boundaries of that state. Some of the regulatory issues that have popped up through the delisting petition process, the first one, Reynolds Metal. Basically, EPA found that conditions upon which the delisting petition was issued were fundamentally different at the site than what had been represented. So that delisting petition was actually repealed. It resulted in a reopener clause being put in subsequent delisting petitions, and also required leaching of metals at multiple pH ranges to reflect conditions that may be encountered at different places throughout the country. Also, if there's a fundamental or significant change in the chemical production process or refinery operations and or the waste that are generated from those production operations, that can be a reopener for the delisting petition. If end uses differ from what you represented in the delisting petition, for example, if you said it was going to a landfill for the disposal method and it goes to a surface impoundment, that's a fundamental change in the delisting petition and would trigger reopening. Also, combustion at commercial facilities. Any commercial facility that applies for a delisting petition, and I know of one that's been successful, there are going to be issues because of the diversity of materials managed at a commercial TSDF, treatment storage disposal facility. Some of the time frames for Region 6, again, each region varies and it's based on their caseload at the time. But Region 6 in Dallas has adopted a policy of trying to do a full review and issuance of a delisting petition in 180 days. That includes basically 30 days to draft a petition, 40 days to circulate it internally and seek concurrence from everyone, then publish it in the Federal Register, a comment period, then after the comment period, run it through concurrence again, make sure everyone from a Region 6 management perspective is in agreement, and then publish the final rule. Real quick overview of what Region 6 has experienced in terms of delisting petitions. They currently, this was as of 2 weeks ago, have 2 petitions in-house. Both are in Texas. Again, Louisiana and Oklahoma administer their own programs, so they're not rolled up into Region 6 statistics. And since delisting petitions were delegated to the region in 1996, Region 6 has made 34 determinations with 29 final approvals, 4 withdrawals where basically the petitioner found out their case was not supportive of delisting, so they withdrew their delisting petition, and 1 repeal of a final rule, and that was for the Reynolds aluminum site. The program is evolving over time, and typically it relates around updating the delisting risk assessment software, or the primary tool that EPA uses to assess delisting petitions. The last update was done in 2007, and a lot of the internal factors for dilution attenuation, toxicity, risk-based, etc., those were updated at that time. In companion with that, they also updated the guidance manual and had individual regional guidance materials available. Currently, version 4.0 is under development. It's hoped that that will be a web-based version as opposed to a downloadable software. And EPA currently feels that probably will come out in the 2017 timeframe. And that's a quick primer on delisting petitions. Anyone have questions?
Wonderful information, Kyle. Thank you so much. And please, if anyone does have questions, please note them directly in the chat pod on the bottom right-hand corner. We'll stay online for a few moments for any questions you have of Kyle, please. Thank you. While you're waiting to compile any questions, thank you so much for joining us, and there will be a short evaluation sent out to everyone who has participated in today's webinar. There will also be a recording link that will be sent out as well, so please take a few moments to complete the course evaluation. We appreciate your feedback, and again, if there's any questions, please note them directly in the small chat pod, and we'll stay online for a few more minutes. Thank you so much.
Just got a question from Ala, and the question is, any idea about Canada? Is there any province which has delisting authority? And I'm not intimately familiar with Canadian environmental regulations, but this is a United States environmental regulation, so there are no provinces. Basically, it's a jurisdictional issue that EPA has control over or authority over.
Thank you, Kyle. Well, we'll end our webinar now. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Again, there will be a brief evaluation sent out, so please take a few moments to complete that. We do have a few future webinars scheduled as well, and we keep updating our webinars on our website, so please go to www.peice.com to check out our upcoming webinars. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. And we'll be ending our webinar in just a second, just in case there's any other additional questions. Thank you so much. Thank you, Kyle.
Yes, thank everyone.